Good evening, everyone. It's so lovely to be here. It's been such a privilege to be invited. Thank you. And thank you for coming tonight. So this is rather a strange adventure on my part in that I never expected, at 65 as I am now, to have published my first book and to be going around the country talking about Juicy Crones. And I'll tell you in a bit where the title came from. Neither did I ever in a million years, and I mean that, this is not something I thought at all, expect to be on OK exclusive online. Because for those of you who know me, my niece Harriet here, I'm not the slightest bit interested in celebrity, in fashion, in gossip, any of those things. So to find myself there in January was the biggest surprise ever. So life, post-menopause can be very strange, very exciting, and I want to tell you about some of that excitement that's happening and hopefully open up some ideas for you. So, where did it all begin for me? I had a really interesting career, one that I absolutely loved. I was lead for Children's Health and Wellbeing for Gloucestershire. It was a passion of mine. I was fully in it all of the time. Unfortunately, I became unwell and eventually decided that I needed to retire a bit early. And when I did, I didn't have any expectation that I would find retirement difficult. I've always been one of those people who has far too many ideas for my own good, far too many hobbies, far too many interests. So I didn't think for a minute it would be tricky, but it was. And I'm just going to read you the intro to the preface of the book, and then tell you a bit more about how this journey of mine proceeded. The germ of this book started to grow when I retired. I was finding my way into a different life from the world of work and family I'd known for almost 40 years. Those years were gone, and I was afraid that I had too. It was an exciting time, daunting and sometimes challenging, to keep what the poet Dorothy Nimmo described as the black parrots at bay, those squawking voices that tell us we're too old, too wrinkly, and so on. It was, and still is, a time to wrestle with the big questions of life, death, and meaning. But most of all, to give myself permission to live this part of my life to the full. Virginia Woolf's phrase, "free for the strangest adventures," lodged itself as an earworm. In the words of my friend Jilly, there are only two stages in life, not too late and too late. I needed to get a wriggle on. So that's where I was starting, quite lost, not sure at all about where I wanted to go. So we actually went somewhere where I got completely lost, and this is a picture taken. I went to the Faroe Islands walking on my own, out of season, not quite realising what a dangerous place it could be, but absolutely stunning. So if you're not sure, it's sort of halfway between Iceland and Norway, but nowhere near as developed as Iceland, so quite lost. But being post-menopausal, I was both lost in fog, really, and lost in fog metaphorically. And I came across a quote from Rebecca Solnit, who's one of my favourite writers. And she said, "The things we want are transformative, and we don't know, or only think we know, what is on the other side of that transformation. Never to get lost is not to live." So, in order to try and work out what I wanted to do with my retirement, I went and took an MA in travel and nature writing at Valspar University. I love travel and I love nature, but I wouldn't ever profess to be an expert in either. But what I was finding was that I was really enjoying writing. I suppose I was scribbling really for my own sanity, to try and find out who I was at this stage and what I was doing and what I wanted to do. And as I was coming back from the Faroe Islands, I entered the Telegraph it's a weekly competition called Just Back, and it's 500 words about the journey you've just been on. And I literally wrote it on the plane coming home from the Faroes. So it was authentic. And I wrote about that metaphorical, metaphysical thing of being lost. And to my utter astonishment, I won that week's prize, which I think was £250 in Icelandic kroner, I think, as it happened. You could request what you wanted. And that was just wonderful, and it gave me encouragement to think that somebody thought my writing was worth doing. What I wasn't expecting at all was in 2018 to be named the overall winner for the 52 weeks of 2018. So that was really a boost. More foreign currency, which is even better. So I think I chose Denmark, and I can't remember now, but some of it's still sitting there because of recent events. So that gave a boost to my confidence. I really enjoyed that, and it made me think about what I was going to do next. So I began to wonder about talking to lots of women to find out what their solution to the whole thing about cronehood is. Crones have traditionally been the wise women of communities, but in recent years they're not seen as that at all. We're seen as sort of old and past it and no use to society. And I wanted to go on a quest and find women who were doing interesting things. And then I thought there might be a project in it, some writing. I wasn't at this stage thinking that it may be a book. It wasn't in my head at all. So I started contacting one or two people, and I thought, right, I'm going to go on a big journey. So I was going to start north, because we both like going north, and gradually head my way down from Iceland, actually, down the Shetland Islands, Orkney, down through Scotland, which is a favourite of mine. And then I was going to do some parts of Europe and then drop right the way down to New Zealand. That was the plan. As Harriet's grandmother would have said, never tell the devil too much of your mind. Because we all know what happens then. So I was locked down. I was trying to write a story about women going off and having adventures, and nobody was going anywhere. It was mad. The red hair there, which you'll have to excuse, was because my eldest granddaughter in lockdown was having a Harry Potter Zoom party. I mean, it was grim, wasn't it, for those children? And so I said I'd go as Ron Weasley, basically. So the red hair was extraordinary, but you know, at least it was a new face every morning. The minute we were allowed to move at all, I did. I set off in my camper van and I went down to Dorset to meet a couple of women down there to interview them for the book. Unfortunately for me, although it was April, I set off in snow, and the government in their wisdom said that campsites could open, but not their facilities. Yeah, so it was a good job the 2-metre rule was in place. That was the sort of gist of the book, that I wanted to talk to as many women as I could from as many different backgrounds, but that was obviously curtailed by not being able to travel. Luckily for me, Women's Hour at the time had a listener week, and so I wrote in and said, this is my project, would be interested, and they were. And so I had an interview just the day or two before Jenny Murray retired, and so I was able to do a shout out on Women's Hour, and I had women from all over the country write in to tell me about what they were doing. And then later, it's not quite in sequence here, but later then, when I got my publisher Brat, they sent out on their social media a request for any stories. So that's how the stories came about, not at all how I was expecting to do the book. Okay, so I must have interviewed well over 50 women for the book. And as you can imagine, it's quite time-consuming, but so glorious. Such wonderful women out there, such fabulous stories. And I'm just going to read a little bit here from what I wrote about the whole process of writing the book. So this is about the women in the book, the 12 that are named in the book. These are their stories. They have chosen what it's... I'm hoping that Supriya's going to agree this is what happened. They have chosen what has made it onto the pages of their chapter and what has not. And I have turned their spoken words into manageable chapters, as close to their authentic voice as possible. Inevitably, in the telling, we revise and reflect our stories and our philosophy of life. And as draft copies passed between us, women often said, "I've been thinking about that, and now I feel differently. I now believe." There's been a lot of soul searching, but a lot of laughter and fun too. In the way of things, we were all changed in the telling. Each of these women talked about the ways in which they gave themselves permission to do the things they wanted to do. One told me that she regularly stops and asks herself, "Is this how I want to spend the time that I have left? What is it we want to do with our precious time?" Every woman in the book has had to face a life-altering, irrevocable event. Without exception, they've spent time and energy and found self-compassion in the face of these events to find a peaceful place within, allowing them to own a unique path into a meaningful cronehood. They have faced the things we all dread the most: receiving a life-limiting diagnosis, the death of a loved one, betrayal, divorce, violence, a financial crisis. None of these events is invited. They're grindingly painful and often frightening. They can, however, have a beautiful and unexpected silver lining of transformation if we allow them to. In a recent TED Talk, Jean Shinoda Bolen described crisis as a liminal time in which everything changes and everything is thrown into the air. With time, the crisis can lead to a reappraisal, and sometimes that reappraisal enables us to reconnect with our dreams and our authentic self. And that's what the women in this book are sharing with us, their transformative experiences. Each of the Juicy Crones explores what worked for them during this time of transition, not just in the doing, but in the being.
That's all well said.
Thank you. So I mentioned there Jean Shinoda Bolen. She's an American Jungian analyst, and I was reading some of her work in preparation, just thinking about things. And she had in one of her paragraphs this phrase, Juicy Crones, and it made me laugh out loud. And that didn't happen much when you're doing reading about old women. It just, so I emailed her and said how much I loved the phrase and would she allow me to use it as the title for the book. Or I'm not sure I was even at that stage, but would she allow me to use it? And she said, absolutely, with her blessing, anything that can happen to support older women is fantastic. And it was just such a lovely email to get back. So I've got a lot to thank her for using the phrase.
And it's such a wonderful title as well.
Well, it makes you laugh, and that's what we need, isn't it? Yeah. So then I started meeting wonderful women. And actually, I was thinking, Supriya, it's almost 2 years ago since you and I met at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. So I was heading down from the Hebrides via, I know geographically this is challenged, but via Edinburgh to interview Tamsin, who's the very long distance walker, thousands of miles. So I'd seen her up in Leith near Edinburgh, and then you and I met in the cafe at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. And we were there for maybe like 5 hours drinking coffee, and it was a fantastic time. And Supriya really inspired me, and I loved her story. And most of you know Supriya, but I'm going to talk about her anyway. Close your ears. So I'm going to read a passage here. I think most of you know, but Supriya had a very successful career in banking. She was a very well-respected in her own right in that role, but there was a little niggle, I think, at the back of your mind that perhaps you'd like to do something else, and that's where I'm picking up on the chapter here. By then, you and Raja had moved to the UK, and after an incredible journey you both had, all over the place and round, and I think you said your children had 6 schools in 6 years or something. I'm coming in here at the point where Supriya is beginning to think of doing something else other than banking. So this is in Supriya's words. As with all good stories, my luck began in the most unlikely of places, the Yorkshire Sculpture Park near Wakefield. The park tended to be regarded as a place for white middle-class dog walkers surrounded by a large Asian population. I used to come and walk around this beautiful place and admire the work of Barbara Hepworth and the other sculptors and wonder why I didn't see anyone else who looked like me. So I approached Anna Bowman, curator of the National Arts Education Archive at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park. I proposed a series of events at the park that would appeal to be held every second Sunday in the month over the space of a year. I reached out into the diaspora and encouraged people to come, to know that the park was a place for them too. This was the first time I tested myself, talking the talk and walking the walk. Sometimes I performed, and sometimes I invited other artists and curated programs. It was very successful and began to change the narrative about who the Yorkshire Sculpture Park was for. So that's where we met, in the sculpture park. But before that, there's just a little kind of backstep here. Finally, having our own home in England gave me the space to return to the love of Carnatic music and to the practice of playing and vocalising. It took me time to gain confidence and skills, but I just knew it was what I wanted to do. Slowly, I wondered if it could be the start of a new career for me, to share and celebrate Carnatic singing through local schools and communities, though it was neither a logical nor a safe choice. I had no idea then how my passion might grow into a business. A guru who I really respected and who knew Sanskrit suggested I call my new venture Manasamitra. Manasa means mind or heart, and Mitra means friend of the heart and mind. I really love this concept. So Manasamitra was born. Only then did I realise that no one in the UK knew what Carnatic music was, and that I would have to spread the word. The only business model I knew was from my work in the bank, so I created 2,000 leaflets and posted them to arts centres and schools, offering them Carnatic workshops. A week went by, and I was excited, expecting to get replies taking up the offer. There was not one response. I sat in my rocking chair and realised I'd have to go back to basics and understand the industry differently. The bank sold products, but in the music industry, you're selling an experience. I know now that my first approach would never have worked. The first 5 years of Manasamitra were an uphill struggle. I was an unknown as a musician, and Carnatic singing was unheard of. Not only that, but it seemed that no one was interested in understanding the music. I was confident in my abilities, but who would give me a chance? I think you've had lots of chances now, haven't you?
Absolutely.
A remarkable career. I'm so proud of you, so impressed.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you.
So, Supriya, one of the women I interviewed, and it's just a glorious story. Other women in the book are women like Alex. Alex was 60 when she did the usual test that you get from the NHS, poo stick test, and discovered to her horror that she had bowel cancer. She had had a bit of a torrid time because her mum was very poorly, and so she'd been looking after her. And she just started to do park runs as a way of actually warding off depression. She thought that the exercise might help. Lo and behold, she got the running bug. And in her story, she intersperses training for marathons with major surgery. She's had 3 major surgeries. And today she is running ultra marathons for charity, 2 ultra marathons in 2 weeks.
Wow.
She was severely allergic to chemotherapy, so they had to stop that. And so she then couldn't go via any usual routes, and she's managed to keep the cancer at bay by diet and by exercise. So she's a wonderful woman, and she's literally running. And this is a friend of mine, Caroline, who never got the chance to finish her first degree because she found herself pregnant with her first child. Fast forward 4 pregnancies, 4 children later, and 40 odd years of, raising children, well, 30 odd perhaps, but raising children and so on. And she still hadn't fulfilled her love of art. So she went back at that stage and did a master's in fine art. And now she's opened this lovely little gallery in Ledbury, which is
a beautiful gallery.
It is really lovely. Yeah. And she's teaching courses there and showcasing local art. And this is perhaps a surprising one. This is Deb's. She contacted me, I think, via Woman's Eye, I'm not sure. She and her husband were getting a little bit restless. They were sort of just approaching 50. She had horrendous menopause symptoms and was fed up with the whole thing. And they saw a campsite for sale in Hungary. And so they hopped on a £20 flight with Wizz Air.
Wow.
And they bought a campsite in Hungary, as one does. Unfortunately for them, lockdown happened about a month after they bought it. So, but what she's developed there is she's now growing all sorts of herbs and plants in the garden. She's set up a tea house, as well as other Hungarian dining and food and the static tents and all sorts of things going on there. But she's got this sort of women's centre for herbal teas and so on. So it's a really lovely idea, and I do think we should have Juicy Crones visit there.
Definitely, I was just thinking that as you were saying.
I really do.
What's not to love about it?
And it's so beautiful. It's surrounded by lakes and right into nature. So I think that would be a lovely one. So this is my daughter's dog. Reading one of the many articles that came out. So the day after the book was launched in January, unbelievably, there was an exclusive in the main Sunday papers of that day. So it was in all the supplements. Various women were featured. And I think I did 14 local radio shows, about 6 podcasts. Radio Europe picked it up. It was absolutely phenomenal. I had no idea that this was going to happen. And part of me was absolutely thrilled. It was incredible and so flattering, and it was really lovely for all the women in the book to get their moment in the sun, as it were. But then I kept thinking, why is this a story? Older women doing something.
It is indeed.
And it's a story. Because when I was deciding on which women I wanted to interview and which stories I was going to write, I deliberately didn't choose women who were climbing Everest or doing something that was unrelatable, well, to me anyway. I was trying to look for women who would relate to other women, and that although I could never be a Carnatic singer, Harriet might aspire to be a singer. It's that thing, isn't it, about that little glimmer of, I wonder if I could do such and such. So it wasn't about women who were already, paddleboarding across the Atlantic. It was about women who changed post-menopause to either do something they'd always wanted to do or something they'd never dreamed of doing. So it is a story. It's been all over the press. So why is it a story? Well, this might add into the equation a bit. I was at a family party. I'm going to have to be careful what I say here. And someone at the party asked me, it was before the book was launched, what my book was about. And I said, oh, it's about older women who post-menopause are enjoying doing new things or starting to do things they've always dreamed of doing, and they've never had the chance. And he said to me, oh, I'm not sure I want my wife reading that. And he immediately went, oh, ha, 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 as if it was a joke. And I think he began to reel it back in. He's like, oh. So I'm wondering if he has thought about what he said there. So I was a bit shocked and surprised by this. But the next day I had a friend coming around for lunch and we were going for a walk. And I relayed this story to her and she said, oh yeah, I don't think my husband would like me to see me reading this. So then I chatted to a friend in the village and she said, oh yeah, I think a lot of women would feel that way. And it's like, really? We can't read a book? It's, you know, it was a very strange, I was really shocked. But
I am shocked now.
yeah, I was really shocked. So maybe that relates to why it's so newsworthy. I don't know. I can speculate forever. So how did I decide what I was going to do? I have to say I'm not the fittest person in the world. However, I decided I would have fun and do all the things that I thought might be fun. I would try and have a new relationship with self post-menopause, because I think for many women you spend a lot of your life in that sort of monthly cycle going round and round. Most of us are raising children and you get to that phase where menopause happens and it can be fine and it can be horrendous, but you are a different person after it. You're not the same person you were before. So I sort of realised I needed a new relationship with self. I also needed to challenge the barriers in my head, including those limited voices saying, oh, you're too old for that, or you shouldn't do that, or oh, what would so-and-so think if you were doing bungee gym and you know, well, I do look ridiculous, but it was jolly good fun, I can tell you. But also, does it resonate with me? Am I really enjoying this? Or am I doing this because my friends are doing it, you know? And is it either fun or is it meaningful? They were my sort of criteria about my choices at this stage. The other very, very important thing, and I'm being a bit cheeky here, but we hear a lot about, you know, cronyism in government and so on. But I don't know about you in the audience. I found the support and the love of older women has been absolutely fantastic at encouraging each other, supporting each other. I belong to a lot of walking groups and outdoor groups, and it's just fantastic, all encouraging each other up the mountain, all supporting each other when we can't quite remember how the tent goes up, or when you need somebody on hand to help you with your IT. Thank you, Duncan. That wonderful support that older women give to each other and the wisdom we can share, because we've all been there, done that with most things. We may not want to remember it, but you know, we have. And so I do find that support of older women remarkable. And I'm sort of coming towards the end now, but this was, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Orkney. This is Skara Brae up in the Orkney Isles, and it was
beautiful.
It's absolutely stunning. So I was up there last summer, July, late June, July? Yes, I went up for the solstice to be there for that. And something occurred to me. I was hopping between Orkney and the main library at Kirkwall, which if you ever need a library, that's absolutely beautiful, finishing off the edits for the book, but also walking and hiking and taking myself off around these incredibly beautiful islands. And I'll just read a bit here from, what time?
Yeah, absolutely.
Of what happened whilst I was at Skara Brae. So if you're not familiar, this is one of the oldest Neolithic sites in the country. And I thought when I first arrived that it had been reset. You know, they'd put the stones like that. That was actually how it was. Wow. So for 100,000 years, it had been filled with sand. And there was a massive storm, I forget the dates on this, where all the sand came out and they could see that there was this homestead there. And it felt so familiar. I don't know if you can see. It's not hard to imagine a stone dresser. There's a bed into the wall. There's a hearth. It's not that dissimilar, is it?
Not really.
It's just, it felt so familiar. I was quite awestruck by it, not least because whilst I was there, the guide was really helpful, and she was saying to me that they've just realised that the other Neolithic settlement in Durrington Walls was copied from that one, which made me go really cold because I was born on Salisbury Plain in Durrington Walls, so it just felt a bit kind of head blown at the time.
Connected.
Yeah, so I highly recommend you go, but I'll just read a passage there. It's the summer of 2022, and I'm on a solo trip to the Orkney Islands, but my head is telling me it's 2020, because that's the year I was supposed to be here. I'd planned several weeks of travel around Orkney, Shetland, Iceland and the Faroes for the start of my Juicy Crones quest. I'd long wanted to visit Skara Brae in the west mainland of Orkney, and I'm not disappointed. A Neolithic site around 5,000 years old, it comprises a cluster of houses complete with stone furniture, which make it easy to imagine living there. At the entrance, a note informs visitors that evidence and conclusions are presented on 2 levels. Printed in normal type are things we know, things for which we have actual evidence based on physical remains. Printed in italic type are things we can only guess, things that are likely based on what we know from elsewhere, but for which there can be no absolute certainty. This strikes me as a parallel to the wisdom we reach in our third age, that the lives we had led and the challenges we have overcome point us to understand the world more often in italics. All the Juicy Crones celebrated in this book have faced life-changing events. Their lives could no longer be written in normal type. They became uncertain of so much, of what they thought they knew, that they became italicised. Initially, living our life in italics can feel disorientating, sometimes frightening. However, a gradual acceptance of living with uncertainty can lead to finding unexpected pleasure, contentment even. There is a profound wisdom to be had in italics. They enable us to take the long view, to be less certain of what we once thought of as fact. At Skara Brae, I was made poignantly aware of other lives, lived in strong communities through countless generations, and of course, of the tiny grain of sand of my own life, and of the connections between us all. So overwhelmed was I by this deep sense of history that I needed to step away from the site for a while. There's a gate from the settlement that leads onto the Bay of Scale, that you can see in the background there. I sat there reflecting and scribbling to untangle my thoughts. A young woman came by and we chatted. It turned out that we were both staying on the same campsite, and we met later that week for a drink. Alona is a PhD student studying island tourism on Orkney. She told me that very often, when she arrives to do her research on a new island, she's asked, "How was your crossing?" It's a question unique to those whose lives are lived via sea roads, with all the jeopardy that entails. It occurs to me that this is the question that needs to be asked of postmenopausal women. How was your crossing? How did you fare on the sea between your perimenopausal years and landing in this new terrain, this new post-menopausal island? It may have been calm for you, tranquil even, relatively quick. You may have been one of the lucky ones who's made it across with little to remark upon, or it may have been a stormy crossing, one on which you felt perilously close to capsizing and shipwreck, or anywhere in between. However the voyage was, it will have taken years, somewhere between 7 and 15. That's quite a journey. We owe it to ourselves to honour it, to ask ourselves and our fellow crones, how was your crossing? To accept and celebrate that we have crossed over, that we have reached a different land, and a new life awaits us there. This recognition allows us to live life in our own unique way, unapologetically embracing our newfound island, and at liberty at last to be free for the strangest adventure. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
I absolutely love that last part
Thank
about
you.
the crossing, because that's so true, isn't it? It can range from 7 to 15 years.
Perhaps someone who told me 20 something. It's like, oh.
And it is quite a journey. You know, as some ladies in the audience would be able to ascribe to, say, you know, it's quite a journey. So that was wonderful to actually hear you read the book and read the passages, and you know, you see it in letters, but then to actually hear it from you, that's a different experience. So thank you very much for making the journey and reading from the book for us. One immediate question that comes to mind is, how much did you enjoy the journey as much as, of course, getting to the end of it? So how much did you enjoy it?
I think because it was completely new, I'd never written anything before, apart from boring strategic papers and stuff like that. I had absolutely no idea how hard it was going to be and how many hours it took. And I was, you know, I treated it like a job. I was at my desk at 5, 6 in the morning, you know. The work interviewing the women was just incredible. But as you'll know, we spent hours. I spent hours with each woman. I wanted to make sure that I really, as much as I could, understood where that woman was coming from and what her underlying story is. Because actually, the thing that they did, whether it was singing or running or whatever, wasn't the most interesting bit. The bit where how they got to that and what it meant to them was the very interesting bit, not wanting to minimise the event itself. And the toing and froing, you know, once I'd written it in a rough draft and then it came back and back and back, and I asked all of the women, they had to sign off on it and say, this is me, this is, I recognise myself in the story, this sounds like me. And I hadn't realised as a sort of novice writer what a presumptuous thing that was to do, to actually try and put something into someone else, you know, their voice. But I think it was enriching for all of us. I think we all learned a lot from each other, and I think without fail, all of the women, wherever they were in the country or around the world, who contacted me, all of them said, well, I've been doing this, but I don't think you'll be that interested, and it's not a good enough story to tell, and la la la. So we went through the same thing every time, and I was inside feeling exactly the same as they were. And then when it came to the final cut, and obviously I was looking for a breadth of stories and so on, when I decided on the final 12 and I was getting you all to sign off, yeah, this can go, you know, to print now, then they all came in with, but I'm very happy to be dropped from it because I'm sure there's a better story. So we went through the same thing again. So it was a big journey for all of us to put ourselves out there, and everyone, all of us, had the same dilemma about how much of our story we were at liberty to tell, because none of us lives in isolation. We all have family, we all have family we want to protect. On the other hand, we want to tell our, you know, we've chosen to tell our story. So it was tricky in that sense. What did you ask me? How difficult?
Well, this therefore tells me that there is, you know, enough material for Juicy Crones 2 and Juicy Crones 3. So there are stories out there, remarkable stories that, you know,
incredible.
Yeah.
I loved the whole process. I hated the editing because I'm very bad at doing things in the right order.
Sure.
And that's very procedural, isn't it? So
yeah.
I did spend a lot of time panicking, basically. But my publisher, Brat, the editor, was just tremendous, and she did respond to like a 6 a.m. I've lost where track change has gone, I've lost the whole thing, you know. So they were very good for, you know, a novice. I couldn't have asked for a better publishing house for a novice writer.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, all of us in our lives and jobs like to do certain things and we are good at it.
Yeah.
And then there is that
No,
we
it
are not
wasn't.
good at, we don't much like, and we
But
could
it had to be
avoid.
done, and it had to be done very carefully, and that was tricky.
So did you have any of the women that you spoke to come back and say, this is not me really? Did you actually have that?
I didn't have anyone who said you've got me entirely wrong. Phew. I had where I'd guessed at phrases, women would say, "Oh, I'd never say that final." You know, sometimes you have to do some guessing. I'd sent paperwork to all the women at the start in terms of confidentiality and what my boundaries were and what their boundaries were, and also said to them that if any point they wanted to withdraw, then they could. Obviously hoping that they wouldn't. Yeah. But two women did quite far on, and that was quite tricky. So one woman in Australia who had an incredible story to tell pulled out very late on, and I had a very interesting 4 days, I think, to find another one and turn the story around. So that was interesting. And there was another woman who, right at the last minute, felt she had disclosed more than she wanted to. But by then it was almost to print.
Right.
So that was another sort of 5 a.m. call or 6. And what we actually did was we changed the wording word for word, character for character, so it could just be dropped in to the paragraph.
I see.
Phew. But you know, there were a lot of last minute. There always are with any project, aren't there?
Sure.
Yeah. So
because it involved other people.
Yes, exactly.
It involved their lives.
Yeah. She had agonised over it, but at the time when she signed off initially, she said it was important that story was told. But then I think she felt too vulnerable, which is fair enough. Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a very unfair question.
Oh dear.
Which was your favourite story?
Oh no, that is unfair. Well, I have to say, Alex was absolutely remarkable. To be undergoing major cancer surgery and yet still keeping on with her dream, I found absolutely incredible. Not least because she's a self-confessed introvert. To put herself out there in the book was a big ask for her. She's not someone who ever likes to be on the public stage. But the fact she carried on with it because she wanted to offer hope to other women, and I was full of admiration for that. Yeah.
Sounds wonderful.
Apart from that, I'm not going to choose between any of my 12 children. You were all amazing.
No, I completely get that.
Particularly, you know, this was all happening in the most peculiar time in lockdown, and nobody's head was quite on their shoulders at the time. So whilst you're in the safety of a Zoom, you know, you think, oh yeah, I'll talk about that, and then when you come out of lockdown, it's like, oh no, I don't want to talk about that. You know, it's a real thing. So yeah.
So, I mean, talking about lockdown, would you say that you would do it differently now if you, or do you feel like you've done it, you've learned, and you probably will, that was the best way?
I don't think it was necessarily the best way.
Right.
But I certainly met with people like yourself who I might never have met with. Janette on Rhode Island, I hadn't planned to go to America for my journeying, so I wouldn't have met her. And actually, her story of being neurodivergent and having Tourette's, and her journey was actually embracing self and coming to love the person she was, having thought for all of her life that she was some sort of freak, you know. And that was very moving. I spent a lot of time with her, always on Zoom because obviously I couldn't travel, and she was the only one who wrote her own story because I genuinely felt I couldn't get inside her head and do her story justice, so she wrote her own story. But yeah, I mean, that she's told me how much of an impact that's had on her life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a way, lockdown actually increased and widened access.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
Which is an interesting place to be, isn't it?
Everything was a bit of a paradox, wasn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah, yeah. So I met
I agree.
women I would never have met. I met them from across the globe. Yeah, it was
Interesting.
So it was about adventures, but none of us were moving. Yes, it was.
I found that in my work as well, that I had assumed lockdown was going to be this period of time when, what would I do with my life? And it became a really busy period.
Yeah.
You just wonder what happened there.
Yeah.
I think it was a case of people rushing to do things because they felt, quite isolated. So they wanted to be in company, that kind of thing. Shall we throw the questions open to the room?
Are there any questions?
Are there any questions?
Hello.
First of all, I think it's incredible that for a first book that you ventured on this kind of topic. Because had it been like a drama or something, you can pour it out straight from your heart, or even like a biography. But this, choosing to interview so many people.
I was
And
mad.
I
I was mad, wasn't I?
I think it's incredible because, especially as you said, that some may feel how presumptuous, but on the other hand, they could even feel glorified. Because others always see you in better light than.
Yes, no, that was very true.
But my question is, you ventured out solo. You said you didn't know what to do after retirement, and so just wanted to travel.
I love travelling, but once I started enjoying writing, I realised that to be alone with my thoughts was what I needed in order to get them down on paper. I'd always been a keen hiker. In fact, Jacqueline and I share something in common because I came to Lancaster University partly to study, but I have to say that every weekend in the Lake District was hard to bear. So I've always enjoyed that mountain walking and just sort of really getting out into the wild. So going off, in fact there's another slide here, going out and getting lost is something I really enjoy. Yeah, because I find, I'm not sure what I'm going to do next in terms of writing. I've got millions of ideas in my head that are kind of.
That's what.
Oh, okay. So I'm a very bizarre kind of old crone in this sense that every jacket I have a bit of paper and a pencil, and I just get ideas down all over the place. I always have a notebook with me, and at some point I just have to trust, to the gods somewhere that this is going to form into something that is worth writing. Because what do they say? A story isn't a story until you're outside the story and can write the story, and I guess that's the case, isn't it? That I have to go out. I'm not sure I'm going back to the Faroes. It wasn't safe on my own.
Iceland?
Yes, possibly. Yeah, and just begin to think what I want to do next. I've got the two things I need, I've discovered, as if I've got much experience in this, are a title and a book jacket. So the book jacket I scribbled down and then got the only female 60s pop artist in the country to do the jacket for me, so that was good. And I've got a sort of title, I've got a title, but I haven't got the book jacket yet, so once that's in my head, I think maybe the next book will, start to write. Yeah.
All the very best.
Oh, thank you, that's very sweet of you, thank you. Thank you.
This jacket, the book cover, utterly gorgeous. It spoke to me immediately.
Oh,
the
so
first
pleased.
time I saw it,
It's so
it was
pleased.
like, wow.
Yeah, I wanted that everything, a cocktail, a cappuccino, some yoga, a few mountains, that embracing the whole of life. Yeah.
It definitely felt very colourful and,
Slightly
it
mad.
was, loved it, absolutely loved it.
I want it to be juicy.
Yeah, and then you pick it up, isn't it? When you see something that captures your mind, then you immediately pick it up. So I would have picked it up if I had seen it somewhere,
Excellent.
without knowing anything about the book.
Good.
So,
Oh,
yeah.
that's nice to know. Thank you.
Any other questions?
How long did it take you to write this book?
The best part of 2 years.
2 years. Okay.
Yeah, so I've submitted the manuscript May last year. And then, of course, there's all the kerfuffle with edits and so on. So, as I say, I was up in Orkney for the solstice, so I had my first edits to do then, hence making big friends with the librarians in Kirkwell Library. It was so helpful. And then it goes on and on in terms of editing and sorting and sifting, and it's. Somebody said to me, they came into the room where I write and they said, "Oh, is this where the magic happens?" And I was like, "No, this is where the rubbish happens." It's true, most of it goes in the bin, most of it. I think for whatever that was, 85,000 words, probably 300,000 were jettisoned. Because you get it wrong most of the time, if you get it right, yeah.
Fabulous.
There are moments, there are little moments you think, "Oh, that's not bad." And the rest of the time you think, "Oh, really?"
Start again.
Yeah, exactly.
So many of the stories about like women who didn't get to do what they'd always wanted to do. Like, is there anything you wish you had really done, or is that the book?
Well, I think I'm sort of living it now. I never thought for 1 minute I'd be a writer. That wasn't something I longed to do, although I'd always felt I wanted to tell my story, but I hadn't thought of it as writing. I was thinking more of a film, actually. It feels more filmic. Is that a word? But I think at the moment I'm just enjoying getting my fitness back and walking and so on. So no, I don't think I'm going to be an opera singer or anything. No.
It's never too late.
No, I think possibly you might need some skill as well. Any other questions?
Anything else?
I just have an observation. I don't know, it's not a question, it's an observation, and I don't know whether you would agree with it. That slide before, how was it crossing? So if we extend it beyond menopause to a woman's entire life, I found women who are self-effacing, or kind of humbling themselves. Some of them have gone through phenomenal crossing, and their achievements are really great, but they don't realize it themselves. Did any of the women that you talked to, did they realize what they have done is fantastic? I mean, they reached the
No, almost none of them.
I see, okay.
In fact, it was the opposite. They kept telling me how theirs wasn't good enough, and they didn't want to take the place of someone who was better than them. That's what they kept saying. There must be somebody who's got a better story. And it's like, no, I love your story. Your story will speak to other women. That's the important thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because actually, if it is, my sort of example I keep wheeling out of, a woman conquering Everest, for example, in a way that's not a useful story for most women, because most of us won't do that. And I think the struggle is the story, isn't it?
Yes.
When we fail, when we meet, not getting a single response to 2,000 flyers, that's when we do our thinking, our reflecting and reappraise, and that's where the learning is, isn't it, really? Yeah, but yeah, it's a good question. And I think it applies to, men, women, we all have points in our life where we have a crossing, don't we? And we do have to do that huge amount of readjusting and reevaluating and not going under, just taking the time to think, what now? Yeah.
I think metaphorically, most people climb Mount Everest in their life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, they do. And lives are on the whole, much longer now. And that was something that I thought about a lot. If I was really, really lucky and lived as long as my parents lived, they lived long lives. This was back sort of when I was mid-50s, about 30 years,
Mm.
which is a fairly modern phenomenon. You know, historically, most men or women, but most women didn't live beyond the menopause. It was just, you know, that was life. And so in a way, it's quite a new-ish thing to have this concept of a life beyond. And I think it's important that we all stay fit and healthy and mentally healthy as possible to enjoy this time.
It's, you know, very interesting we talk about the crossing, because very similar to something I spoke only about 4 days ago. I was at the York Festival of Ideas, and the program was about Sita, the epic heroine of Ramayana. And you know, there's a scenario in which she goes into the forest accompanying her husband. We're talking about 10,000 years ago, so it's a completely different kind of life at that time. But the important thing was, it's metaphorical for forest of life. Because when she went into the forest, there wasn't she wasn't sure what she was going to face, feel. She had never lived in a forest before. So all of us, I think, do this forest of life. And we navigate it differently. That's all it is. You know, we get our own experiences, we navigate it differently. So what was true 10,000 years ago is true today. And that always fascinates me.
Absolutely, it's the human condition, isn't it?
It does. The more the time changes, as my husband Raja would say, everything stays the same.
Yes, there's truth in that. Yeah.
He always says that, and I quite agree with that, actually.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a? I'm kind of sitting here, kind of slightly struck by a contradiction. And it came from your observation about, you know, a lot of women have done amazing things, but they don't kind of realise it or don't talk about it and all the rest of it. So was there a common thread to the women who offered their stories, even though they kind of wanted to retract them later? I'm just thinking from my perspective, if I'd seen an advert or anything that sort of said, oh, come and tell us your story, there's no way on planet Earth I would have responded, because I don't think I'm interesting. So is there something about the women who did put themselves forward?
I'm sure there are millions of women out there who could have told me a really interesting story,
but
who
do
chose
you know what I
not
mean?
to.
So do you see what I'm saying about that contradiction? It's a bit.
Yeah, I absolutely do. I do think it was a bit of the enigma of lockdown, that women were possibly responding to, you know, just as we all thought, oh, I'll try Zoom on fine art, or I'll try it, you know, because we're all, you know. I think there was a little bit of that, and almost a bit of denial that this would ever happen. I think most of them thought I'd never finish the book, so it wasn't going to happen anyway. You know, it was just like, oh yeah, Jay's off one of her ideas, it'll, you know.
So it was a bit of a lockdown fantasy.
I think it might have just been oh look, there's somebody new to talk to. Didn't really think this was going to happen. But I guess within each of those women, I can't speak for them, there was that sense of, I'd really like to tell my story. And she sort of seemed okay. I think I could trust her with my story, you know, because what I did with all the women is I did a quick 10-minute, just me to chat on Zoom, told them about the project, and then gave them time to think about whether they'd like to do it or not. And then we arranged.
I always knew you would write the book. 100%. I had complete faith the book was happening.
You had more faith in me than I had in me.
You had that, you know, determination about you to say, because I did see you at 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning, in, you know, on the PC. And I knew the book was being written, would be written.
Sweating. But yes, it's a good question, and of course we'll never know what the book would have been not during lockdown. You know, it's fascinating, isn't it? How human nature changed a bit in that time. Yeah. Or they could have just been really bored and thought, oh, that's someone to talk to on a Wednesday afternoon. Yeah.
It's the every cloud has a silver lining.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And there was a hard call on my part which ones to choose and which not, and then that awful conversation of, you know, and mostly it was because either stories were too similar, or perhaps the woman hadn't taken the story far enough for it to be a whole story that was interesting. Probably if I went back for, Juicy Crones 2, she might well have got there.
Yeah. Juicy Crones.
And then two of them had such extraordinary stories. They wrote books of their own, so they were, grabbed. Yeah, it was really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a really wonderful evening. Thank you so much for being here, both on behalf of Manasamitra as well as York Festival of Ideas. Thank you for being here. And we hope you had a wonderful time. We certainly did.
I've had a wonderful time. I'm really honoured to be asked. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much, Supriya. Thank you. And thank you all for coming. Thank you.